Episode 92 of the podcast. In the first part, we're going to talk about how stress builds. Little tiny stressors start adding and adding and adding until there's a lot of stress. In the second part, we're going to talk about different ways to calm a dog down. You're listening to the Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast. I'm Chrissy Newmeyer-Smith. I'm a certified professional groomer, a certified behavior consultant for canines, a certified professional dog trainer, and the owner of Happy Critters in Nashua, New Hampshire. And this, my friends and colleagues, is the podcast where grooming and training meet. Stress builds, and it builds and builds. So a little bit of discomfort or being in a weird situation or a little bit of something scary may seem really easy to deal with. But what if you're in a situation where those uncomfy and weird things keep happening? Just keep happening over and over and over again. How many of those things can you handle all at once? How many can you handle back to back? Right? As a person. I mean, we're also talking about the dogs, but think about yourself as a person. Like how does stress build in us? How many things can you handle all at once? How many things can you handle back to back to back to back in a setting where it feels like it's never going to end, right? I know, a little bit of a drama queen, but some of our dogs are drama queens. So in your own mind, can you see how this would raise the difficulty level? How even those small things, if small things on small things on small things on small things suddenly turn into a big, big difficulty. This is a lot of stress, even though it was a bunch of little small things. And maybe you don't notice the stress building until that final 2 or 3 things where you've just about had it. And I think we can relate to that. And I think our dogs often are doing the same thing, right? And I know that's anthropomorphic. I can't get into their brain to know exactly what they're thinking, but this is what I have observed. Right? We have a bunch of things going on at once, and each of those might be a little bit difficult, but we just keep stacking them and stacking them and stacking them and stacking them, right? We do this thing and then that thing. First of all, they're brought in a car, and then they're dropped off, and they're with a stranger, and they're put in a crate, and somebody takes their collars off. Oh my God, my collar's not on. And they get put in a tub, and they're wet down, and then they're soaped up, and then they're wet down, and then they're conditioned, and then they're wet down, and then they're dried. I mean, we do so many things. And then the distraction levels in the room. Holy moly. Right? There are other people, there are phones ringing, there are other dogs, there are dryers, so many things going on. And we just keep building and building and building. And then at the end of the grooming, that dog's like, get away from my face. Stop trying to dry my head. No, you can't get that cheek to look pretty, And it's because all of those little tiny discomforts, all of those little tiny weird things, all of those little tiny stressors all build, and they just keep building up and building up and building up. And that does for us too, right? Some of those stressors are stressors for us too. As a house call groomer, I'm used to nice, pretty quiet, I work at a grooming shop, and I'm like, the noise. By the end of the day, like if someone turns a dryer on, I'm like, oh God, it's not the same as turning a dryer on at the beginning of the day, right? That loud noise at the end of the day is like, oh God, no, please stop. So when we think about all of those little things build, I want you to think about it like blocks. And you just keep stacking them and stacking them and stacking them. And sure, like little 1-inch wooden blocks, like kids played with back in the 1900s. Anyway, you can stack them. That's what they're meant for. Yeah, stack them as many as you want. But if you stack 20 of them, you've got a really shaky tower. You get enough things stacked all together, and you've got something pretty wobbly. You've got something that is not sturdy. So when we think about difficulty and stress, now I want you to think about how we respond to that stress. So that tower is going to fall. What happens when it falls? Right? That tower of blocks built up from all of the stressors, right? I'm going to say, I think we can all relate to some people get really laid back. They're like, take a deep breath. All right, we're going to get through this. All right, that tends to be me. I'm like, all right, just All right, deep breath. Take it in. Recalibrate. All right, move on. Other people, it really throws them a curveball, right? They get really flustered. The next thing that happens, they're like, oh my God, this day is never going to end, right? And our dogs do that too. Like, can you see how some dogs are like, I'm going to go with the flow. All right, I'm going to go with the flow. And other dogs are just, getting more and more ramped up as the day goes forward because the stress is building. Now, from a training point of view, I think we should all be spending time, and this is owners and trainers and groomers and vets, we should all be spending time teaching dogs about the more common things that happen during grooming, because we can minimize the amount of stress. Simply put, there are fewer weird, scary, or stressful things if we work on those things. What if foot touching isn't a stressor? What if foot touching isn't weird or difficult? Then when we get them in the tub, that's at least 12 different things that aren't going to be stacking in your stress column. Okay, because the dog is like, oh, whatever, yeah, you're going to rinse my feet, soap my feet, rinse my feet, condition my feet, rinse my feet, squeeze my feet, dry my feet. My feet are fine. I'm fine with people touching my feet. What if that alone was something that owners were working on and like getting their dog's feet wet? Scrubbing between their toes, right? It's not hard to do. But if that means more of these little things that dogs find really difficult can be worked on at home or can be worked on at a grooming day when that dog is not being groomed, just being around it. I know, now we're talking about having a dog come in when they're not being groomed. What? But just to be around it so that those things aren't as scary, so that when we do have stuff that's new or stuff that they do think is stressful, we aren't stacking up 50 things. When we want the dogs to be comfortable with grooming, we can practice so many different things. We can practice, and we should be having owners practice. So as an example, I usually have owners start working on touching their dog all over. This is part of when I'm working with a puppy. I want you touching your dog all over. I want you to be watching for if he's relaxed or if he's stiff. And I have them press into the dog. Like if you're playing air guitar on their cheek, you can't tell if they're stiff or not. But press in. Is the dog stiff or is the dog loose? And I just teach them how to assess that way and get their dog touched all over. Then start working on standing them up and touching them all over. Not playtime, not massages on the couch, but stands them up, touching them all over. Then we start working on taking things off the coffee table. Okay, I'm going to touch you all over with a remote control. Under your feet, lifting your legs, lifting your tail, right? The things that we need to do to get clippers around a dog or scissors around a dog, I'm having them practice with the coaster, a pair of reading glasses, a jar candle, a box of tissues, right? To get them used to being touched all over with weird stuff that is not a toy, that is not something they're supposed to be putting in their mouth, which is actually part of why picking things up off the coffee table is a little bit better. We can have owners start touching with brushes, and certainly that happens too. But once an owner has a brush or a comb in their hand, much like us, they kind of forget about the dog's lesson. They go into brushing, they go into combing, right? So there is no proper way to touch your dog with a coaster. So you pick a coaster up off of your coffee table, and now you're thinking about the dog's lesson. And this is one of the ways that we can have dogs be used to all of the types of touching that we do. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time. And anytime owners are like, oh, I don't know, I will sit down. I'm actually doing online video conferencing right now for my dog training lessons. I'm doing it in my living room. You guys have a living room and you have a coffee table with stuff. And you don't need grooming equipment to make a grooming experience. You can make a grooming experience at home. You can do so many of these little stressful, distracting things at home. The dogs that are getting picked up regularly or wrapping their arms around them, the bigger dogs, even if the owners aren't able to pick them up, wrapping their arms around them in the way that we need to lift that dog, That's a big important thing, right? So if we can get our owners working on it, then we can lower the amount of little stresses throughout that grooming day. What if that lowers that list of 20 things down to about 5? Well, that's something a dog could probably manage. 5 little things that they're not familiar with. So when we talk about with our owners, we shouldn't be telling them, I want you to massage his feet. Just touch his toes a lot, because that's not really going to help them much. They take that home and they do it wrong. I know. Most of the time, they take that home. Every dog is different, and every owner is different. Most of the time, though, they take that home and they massage his feet. And that is nothing like what we need to do. So if we can get it closer to the context of grooming, closer to the real world, closer to what actually happens, right? Then we can make some progress. So having owners just touching their dogs all over, they do that on the couch. They're like, oh, he's fine with me touching him all over. And they're doing it while they're sharing treats and, tickling back feet. And the mood is entirely different. So we can work on a lot of these little things by standing them up in the living room and touching them with stuff and making it fun. It doesn't become playtime, but it's also not super relaxed, right? It's oh, stand up. You're working right now. We're doing a training session and we're touching you with stuff, right? Enjoy touching them with stuff, right? Get the owners to try it. Get the owners to do it. The owners need to be able to do it too. And if that can help us when we're in the grooming room, so that the new things, there are less new things. There are less weird things. So much more of it is stuff that happens all the time in that dog's life. And it makes a huge difference. So I'll tell you what, the puppies that I start, oh yeah, they're entirely different. They're like, oh yeah, lift my leg. Sure, whatever. Oh, what's that neat new thing you have? Okay, because I get touched with weird things all the time. And because of that, when they're in a new environment, they bounce back really, really well. If you're enjoying this podcast, please remember to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes, and tell all of your friends. How do we calm a dog down? I think we all have our own personal style for this. I mean, we all have a go-to technique or something that you try first, or something that you just generally do without even thinking when you're exposed to a dog who's worried, to a dog who's stressed out, a dog who's becoming aggressive. There's just your first thing that you try. And there are so many ways to calm a dog down. There are so many ways to try to calm a dog down. But there's the thing, and I just gave you a clue. It's about trying to calm the dog down, and it's important to be familiar with many ways to do that, because every dog is different, and no one method will work with every single dog. And that's part of why when we talk to each other, we all have our opinion of what works, because it's working really well for us most of the time. It's your go-to, and maybe it works for many, many, many dogs, but it won't work for all of them. So if we look at the ways that we calm dogs down, and we have more tools in our toolbox, so that when we have the dog that isn't calmed down by a particular style, we have other options to try. And I got to tell you guys, sometimes that means like, ooh, taking a deep breath, recognizing if you have a bias, right? So as you guys could probably guess, if you listen pretty often, I'm much more of the, talk to them, calm them down, petting a little bit, kind of all right, let's just back off a little. Just a little break. It might mean pausing where we are before I proceed to help you calm down. That has served me very well. That's my go-to. And I know when we speak of biases, I know a lot of groomers think that that's, oh God, one of the fur mommies, like, oh yeah, we're spoiling this puppy. But when the goal is clear, we have a clear goal. I am trying to get this dog to calm down. I have an idea in my head of what that looks like, which might just be that paw is still while I do nails. That might just be I'm able to lift that little docked tail and trim around the bum without, you know, anybody trying to sit down on me. That might not be I'm worried about the whole dog being calm in that moment. Everybody has different goals. So you also have to look at the goal. What is the goal? And my goal is also for the dog to be calmer next time, to leave that experience better, to leave that experience feeling like, oh, maybe I can trust this. So we all have to have some goals too. But like I said, every dog is different. And that's why it's important to know a bunch of different ways to do things. So here are a few other ways. One that I see people doing a lot, petting and stroking, right? And that's a little bit of what I do. You know, like I said, I'm more likely like, hey, shush, let's calm down together and keep my hands on the dog. I don't totally disengage. I got my hands on the dog. All right, now let's this foot again, you know, and do it that way. But sometimes people are like, okay, you're all right, and petting and petting and petting. The thing is, I want you to always have the goal in mind of, is the dog in front of you finding that calming? Some of them do, right? So those of you who are like, oh, groomers today, and they're so wishy-washy, and, you know, like, relax, calm down, step away from your bias for a minute, and just be a scientist, and observe, is that dog calming down when someone's stroking it and petting it? Right? I find that many of them do not. They find it a little overstimulating, but there are quite a few who do, because that's the world that they come from. That's their day. That's how their owners interact with them. And that's all right for us to pretend we're the owner if the owner actually has some control. So it is a legitimate way to calm a dog down. Just be thinking about, are you seeing a dog starting to calm down when you're doing it, or when a coworker is doing it? Like, is that dog actually relaxing more and getting better? Now, there are times where petting and stroking can kind of backfire. An example is a dog with a skin condition, right? Like sometimes the dog is behaving in the way they are because they're itchy. And they're itchy, and you have your hands on them, and now they're even more itchy. Now you're itchy, and they have your hands on them, and now you're trying to use that to calm them down. That doesn't work. The next one, patiently proceeding, right? This is another legitimate way to help calm a dog down. It depends on the dog. So imagine you're working, dog starts getting, or we're going to use that docked tail example again, you know, that little itty bitty bitty schnauzer tail. And they're trying to press that tail down, and you just keep patiently, calmly going through the motions, right? In some ways, that's them not being able to really get you wound up, like you're a calming presence. And for some dogs, that really makes a difference. They're like, I mean, mom and dad would have continued to, like, they would have done something different to calm me down, right? And we're just patiently proceeding, patiently continuing, just doing our job, nice and calm, right? And for some dogs, that's really what they need. They just need to see that we're super calm. One of the things that I think that conveys for a dog, and of course I can't get into their head to know exactly what they're thinking, but when we're patient and calm and just proceed, we're also not being very threatening, right? We're not angry. We're not grabby. We're not doing things that feel like we're fighting back. We're just going about our day. And for some dogs, that can be very calming. It's something to keep in your toolbox. And I know for many groomers, that's their go-to. That's the go-to. Like, okay, I'm just going to calm down, and I guess I've just got a rodeo going on here on my table, and I'm just going to calm down and just get going on doing this thing I need to do. So let's talk about another one. This is another one that's really common and I think really valuable for most groomers to know. Just quietly moving them back into position. Every time they start getting antsy, just quietly, without really saying much of anything, physically molding them back into stand facing forward, and then go back to what you were doing. Stand facing forward, go back to what you were doing. And I see a lot of groomers do this, and there are dogs that are overstimulated, and I do it with them. And for many dogs, this works like a charm, right? You just, okay, he's getting really silly. We're just going to put him facing forward again, just with your hands, not even using words. For some dogs, it's the words that just become even more silly. It all depends on the dog. So have a toolbox, right? In your brain. Build a toolbox in your brain. But have a bunch of techniques you're willing to try, because just kind of putting them back so that they're facing forward again, standing facing forward, till eventually they're like, apparently anything I do is going to end with them having me stand facing forward. And for many dogs, it works. So it's a great way to help a dog calm down. And if you are frustrated, the dog is going to know. So that's also part of it, to patiently and calmly, whatever it is you're doing. When we want calm, we have to be calm. Whatever it is you're doing, whatever method you're doing, calm has to be part of it. Your own sense of calm. All right, let's get on to another one. Having another person come over to hold, which has a wide variety of all of these, right? So if another person comes over to hold, are they petting and stroking? Are they holding tight? Are they holding loose? Are they talking to the dog? Are they patiently moving the dog back into position without saying much of anything? So even if you have a second person come over, here's where if you have a coworker, you kind of need to be on the same page with the same style for that moment, because two different styles are going to be kind of, well, I'm not saying it wouldn't work, just that it's going to be really tricky. You'll do better if you're both trying the same thing. But a second person can be overstimulating. So sometimes a second person makes things much harder. So be thinking about, okay, does this dog find that calming? And who is that second person? Is that another staff person present, or is that the owner, right? And what kind of owner are they? When my own vet asks, hey, do you want to hold him, or do you want us to take him out back for blood work? I'll usually say, I don't care either way. I taught my guys to be good for blood work out back, but at the same time, if they're injured or sick, I'll often say no, I'd rather do it. She trusts me because my dogs are literally great for me to do it, because I'm a control freak who's a groomer and used to be a vet tech and is a trainer, and I want them to be good. I'm far more worried about them being good than anybody else is. So, well, except for maybe my husband. So in this case, her staff is like, oh God, an owner's going to hold for a jugular stick, except that I'm the owner that calms the dogs down. Every owner's going to be a little bit different for you. So be reading that. There are times where I'll say, can you just come over and whisper sweet nothings, right? You don't need to restrain. I do not want you holding your dog, clamping down on your dog. That's not what I need right now. I just want you to tell her she's the sweetest little thing. And if they can do that, for some dogs, that calms them down. So a second person can be really, really helpful. Here is another thing to add to your toolbox: giving them a break for 5 to 10 minutes to chill out. Okay, think about that as another tool. Sometimes we're the ones who need the break for 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to move on to something else. This is, wow, okay, let's calm everybody down. I need you to calm down. Everything's going to be great, but I need a break. You need a break. Let's just take a break. And to reset, so that when you get back to the table, you start off with something that they were okay with, and then kind of gently move on to, okay, now it's time to go back to the thing that you thought was scary. Okay? That's actually really pretty good if you can do it. As a house caller, I really can't do a full-on break, but what I do instead is when I'm grooming, if there's something that's really worrying them, I might do a break by moving on to an area that they're totally fine with and continuously working around. Now, the last one that I have listed here in my little list, and there are so many, right? Using cookies or toys. So sometimes you can use cookies or toys to help flip the switch from being scared to being a little bit playful. The problem with using cookies and toys is that for many, many dogs, that gets them really silly. So if I'm trying to calm a dog down, if they're really afraid, if I can switch them to a more happy emotion, if you will, right? There might be some value to that. If I can get them to think, oh, wait, maybe this isn't so bad. That's where you would use something like cookies or toys, make it a little bit more playful. And then when they are more relaxed, more comfortable with you, even if it is cuckoo and playful, then you can tone it down back to calm. So it's sort of like switching gears from being afraid to playful and then to calm. Not the most direct route to calm, but for many dogs, it actually works. So these are just some examples of things that we can do to calm a dog down. God, there are so many. But be thinking about the dog in front of you. The dog in front of you. Well, what does this dog do? Right? What calms this dog down? If you'd like more information, you can find me at Chrissy at happycritters.net, happycrittersdogtraining.com, or you can join the Facebook group, Creating Great Grooming Dogs podcast, or the Facebook page, Creating Great Grooming Dogs. I really look forward to hearing from you.